Greetings, members, one and all of the Salivation Nation. Silver's biggest winning and losing streaks. Let's explore. Many of us who have been accumulating silver for quite some time have certainly seen the wild ride that is silver. More than likely, we'll continue to see that as time goes on. There's more uncertainty now than ever before in the economy, and of course we know that the Federal Reserve is printing more and more money, and there's about to be a currency reset of some manner or form. And it's not just going to be here in the United States, but really around the whole world. And more than likely, it will be more concentrated by a select few who have control over the whole system, and it will be much easier to track. And that alone is one of the reasons why I believe it is incumbent upon us to hold precious metals, and I believe silver is probably one of the cheapest options out there to be able to protect yourself against the uncertainty that we're seeing in the world today. But many people have been frustrated about silver's performance over the years. In fact, as I record this video, the gold to silver ratio is quite high. And that is a problem for silver stackers who see gold as out of reach for many of their needs in order to preserve their wealth. And to be able to accumulate an appreciable amount of gold, you need a lot of money. But you can accumulate an appreciable amount of silver for much less money. Well, that is until recently we've seen the premiums for silver skyrocket. And that is something we have to take into account as well as we examine the winning and losing streaks for silver. This is why I'm showing you these silver eagles here, because that is an example, a prime example of where we're feeling the pain in terms of premiums. I'm going to be referencing a infographic from Visual Capitalist that talks about silver's biggest winning and losing streaks in this video, and this is since 1970. Some of the biggest win and losses for silver that we can calculate, at least that we've seen since 2016, but there's been more that's happened since 2016. In fact, 2016 was the last time we saw an appreciable rise in silver. Since then, it's kind of gone down. And then came the pandemic of 2020. And what happened in March of last year to really kind of hit home for a lot of us when we saw a greater separation between spot price and the physical price of the metal. But let's take a look here at this graph. I think this gives us quite an example here and a concentration of these wins and losses for silver. And look at that, at least from this period of time, and I believe that we can notch up a couple of other numbers there since 2017 or since 2016, and the gains column is clearly in the winning column. There's more gains than losses for silver. And I think that should encourage silver stackers out there when you take into account the price that we've seen. So let's examine some of these here as we look at these chart diagrams as we see these wins and losses here. In the early 70s, the Hunt brothers, sons of a wealthy oil tycoon in Texas, began to try to corner the silver market. So they started out earlier in the decade there. By 1980, the Hunt brothers hold 1/3 of the world's silver supply. They themselves did that. And the price of silver had now jumped from $6 per troy ounce to a record intraday high of $48.70, an increase of 712%. However, the attempt ultimately fails, and the silver price is cut in half. So that would be considered one winning streak, but that was literally from intraday trading of that high. So it was not very long, but you saw there where you can see that even that was not the highest increase for the win for silver, but it did create the largest loss of negative 57% there. And the biggest gain appears to be in 1974 at 57%. Kind of don't know what that's about, but that gives you an idea of that big gain in the silver price at that particular time in that period. Now we move ahead to all these not a lot of activity with silver throughout the mid 80s, really through about 2006. And that's when we started to see things started to kind of move in a positive direction for silver. But by and large, it's been pretty stagnant through a long period of time in terms of its dollar amount there. I don't know if this is adjusted for inflation or not. But anyways, the financial crisis of 2008 hits, and silver hits a low of close to $9 as liquidity dries up temporarily. And then in 2011, we see the famous $50 near peak all time in 2011. It's a nominal price, $50. And these are the nominal holdings, and I guess this is not adjusted for inflation. We can see here that the silver did creep up to that point there to $50, almost $50 an ounce, but again, only for a very short amount of time. But in the coming time, when we see these gains for silver, since that time, there wasn't big losses for silver, because if you take into account and look at it through the period of history, especially since 1970, but really looking back, to the year 2000, or even just before the financial crisis, it never got below to those numbers again. We've got new lows now, which are higher than the previous lows, and where we're seeing silver trading at around $15 an ounce, which is greatly higher than it was before the financial crisis. So I think that is a testimony to silver's winning and losing streaks, and it has had far more wins than losses. And overall, through the course of time, especially when you take into account the last 20 years, it has been a winner when you average it out. But even since 1970, even taking into account those anomalies from 1980 and 2011, which were very brief amounts of time, they get washed out essentially by the averages. And so that is what is holding us on to silver as gaining overall if you wait long enough to hold it. But we're going to see some dips in prices from time to time, like we saw in there when silver went below $12 an ounce in 2020. No one could ever get any silver or even sell any silver for that amount. People were selling it for a premium, and they were getting it for more than spot. And just like today, you're hard pressed to find a dealer, although there are some. I've seen some anecdotal evidence of that being the case, of people who have been selling silver for spot. But most places are paying you above spot now for silver, which is good, which means that, in a sense, that is the true separation, I think, of the spot price of silver. The bid price really is not a thing anymore. It is the ask price and a percentage above that people are getting for silver now. So that is the thing to take into consideration, our premiums at the time of sale, or the lack thereof. So now we look back, and this is another supplement here to this chart of silver's biggest winning and losing streaks. I'd be very curious to see what JP Morgan's holdings of silver are now. I've heard that they have over 43%. They've got now, I've heard, like close to 50%. But of the world's COMEX silver stockpile. But in reality, they are just the custodian of it, as the ownership is within the SLV and other exchange traded funds. But so they're the custodian of the silver, and we can see here throughout the 70s, since 1973, of the percentage that they hold here of the market. and how that has lost and gained throughout the course of history here. And so we can see here the highs of 57 and 55.2% are the numbers that we see here. And then we can see how this plays out. Very interesting indeed. And there's the distribution and the losses there. But fascinating to see how this plays out. And then we look through here. This is an interesting distribution chart that shows the gains by decade and the losses by decade. So during the 1970s, we can see that the gains win at 21% and the losses are at 13%. In the 1980s, after the crash, after the Hunt brothers failed to corner the market, we can see that that the losses were greater, almost 40%. But really, the gains did very well during that time period. But essentially, the losses really hurt in the 1980s. In the 90s, well, it was a fairly stagnant market, with it evening out between gains and losses that decade. I remember that decade well. And in the 2000s, well, look there, the financial crisis, and we saw a great uptick in the price during the latter part of the decade there. So 32%, a great loss there in the distribution there, but the gains were fairly well too. So it is a fascinating period of time because there was a lot of stagnancy in the beginning part of the decade, and I guess that contributed to it. When you take a look in the count of this chart here, we can see that the losses were pretty substantial and consistent, intermixed and during that period of time just before the financial crisis hit. And then the financial crisis hit, and they were more concentrated in the losses. And then in 2010s, well, there were more gains than losses, and they beat them out. In fact, I would dare say that in this decade, we have seen much more gains than losses. And this has been a good decade to be able to witness those gains. And then you look at the final aspect of this infographic, the gains and losses by percentage change over the course of time. And we can see there how that distribution pattern is there. But nonetheless, it all takes us back. With those gains and losses, we're looking at spot price, which does matter no matter what. And no matter what happens, spot price does matter because it's the foundation from which premiums are derived. But there is essentially a physical market and a market derived off of the spot price. And that physical market right now is being realized with these premiums at the time of holding, buying, and selling the silver. And the Silver Eagle is kind of the crux of that because it is the coin that is really commanding the highest premiums at the time of selling as well as buying. So I think it is a quite interesting analysis here of the way that silver's biggest and winning losing streaks have shown in this infographic and distribution pattern. But in the long run, I think of this study we can find, and I think it comes to a good conclusion that silver's really essentially is not necessarily a winning metal, and it's not a losing metal either. What is silver about? I believe that silver is not about winning or losing. It's about preservation of your financial wealth and survival, savings, and preservation. That's what silver is about. And I think that has proven itself time and time again because literally for millennia, silver has been used as money. And I believe that it is still money these days, even though it's not utilized as currency. It is what I refer to as hibernating money. It's essentially asleep. I mean, we can buy a silver eagle, and we can, that silver eagle certainly has a dollar-denominated value on it, but you'd be a fool to take that silver eagle, go into a store, and spend it as a dollar. No, the silver value in itself has a monetary aspect to it, an attribute that I believe transcends beyond governments and beyond epochs, generations. It is literally known as God's money. So this silver eagle that I hold in my hand right here is a coin that I believe will certainly stand the test of time, as it is recognized not only by governments, but by our fellow community members, the community members overall that are stacking silver and holding it for wealth preservation. And that is something that we recognize, and it is highly liquid in that regard. So though it is not utilized as currency, it is money, and has been for thousands of years. So there you have it, a very interesting infographic, I believe. And let me know what your thoughts are, and what are your feelings about silver after seeing its biggest winning and losing streaks. I believe that my feelings are essentially is that it is a wealth preservation tool, but because it does have these periods of wins and losses for it, I believe there are periods where people can take advantage of those wins and losses to make money on silver, and people do and have. But they can also feel pretty discouraged about it as well too. So I'm here to encourage you about silver, because of the aspects and the attributes of it over the course of a long period of time. And there you have it. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for taking the time to watch this video, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.